everyone. Hello. We're going to get started. Welcome. My name is Bruce Sellery, and I am the president of the Canadian Club of Toronto. Thank you very much for joining us today. I want to take a moment to acknowledge that we are meeting on the traditional lands of many Indigenous peoples over the centuries, most recently the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, on whose territory we are gathering today. We are grateful for the opportunity to meet on this land. What a great space in which to have such an important conversation. The Canadian Club has been around for 123 years. And for some of you, you've been to 12,000 events of ours. For some of you, this is a new event. But what I'll say is that for 123 years, we've been engaging Canadians in what matters most. But if you picture what an event would have looked like in, 1897, it would have probably been at the Royal York. There would have been venison. It would have been full of, straight white men talking about banking. That's kind of 1897. And here we are today. There's arugula. I mean, clearly that was just invented. I'm the gay dude introducing an Asian man, and we're talking about climate change. It's like, how does that even happen? It's crazy that we're doing that. Yeah. And his female board chair is here to cheer him on. So this is a new era. It is a new era. And I think, it says something about how the Canadian Club has been able to innovate over 123 years in that we're still in existence, doing really great stuff like this. So we thank Mars for their partnership in making this happen. And we also thank Borden Ladner Gervais, BLG, for their generous sponsorship of today's event. I'm going to introduce the head table. And head table members, please stand as I call your name. Remain standing. This is a part of our tradition. We'll do this part. Please remain standing until everyone's name is called. And guests, if you could hold your applause until all names have been mentioned. Jung-Woo, CEO, Mars Discovery District. Cherie Brandt, partner, Borden Ladner Gervais LLP, and director, Hydro One. Richard W. Ivey, chairman, Ivest Properties Limited, and vice chair, Mars Board. Rocco Rossi, President and CEO, Ontario Chamber of Commerce. Danny Sad, Lead Stakeholder Relations and Special Projects, City of Toronto, and Civic Action Diversity Fellow 2018. Annette Verschuren, CEO, NR Store Inc., and Chair, Mars Board. And Greg Stanford, U.S. Consul General of Toronto. Guests, your head table. Round of applause for your head table. I would also like to welcome our youth and young leaders joining us from Civic Action and Upper Canada College. Where are you? Little shout out, little woo woo, yay! Thank you for coming. I'm going to ask Jung-Woo to do our business card draw. So there's Dev. Dev's going to give you a bowl of business cards. It is amazing to me that people still have business cards in your pocket. So very 2005 of you. And the winner of our draw will receive a one-year subscription to The Logic, Canada's best resource for in-depth reporting on the innovation economy.
And the winner is Bill Covesi from the University of Waterloo. Where are you, Bill?
Where's Bill? There you are. Nice. We'll bring that prize over to you. Now, before I formally introduce Jung, I want to invite you to submit any questions that you have to him, either now, because they're at the top of your mind, or over the course of his presentation. There are question cards in the middle of your table. Fill out your question, and then just subtly kind of hold your question, and one of our staff members or volunteers will circle around at the conclusion of his speech. I will be grabbing those cards and vetting them for swear words, and then asking the questions of Jung from the front of the room. It's now time to introduce our guest speaker. The climate crisis is leading the headlines almost every single day of the week. It is the wildfires in Australia. It's the epic snowstorm in Newfoundland. It's Maple Leaf Foods news that they are now a carbon neutral company. It's Mark Carney as the UN Special Envoy on Climate Change. And Larry Fink of BlackRock, the biggest asset manager in the entire world, saying that the firm is going to focus on climate change. So it could be that we are at a tipping point in this area. And at Mars, the climate crisis is a real priority. It is scaling clean tech ventures, working with business and government to create sustainable markets, and using its innovation hub as a platform to explore ideas and inspire change. Mars is also adopting carbon-reducing solutions, including bullfrog power. So this event, 100% green electricity thanks to bullfrog power. Their generators put, yeah, I know, a little applause there. 100% 100% green power into the grid to match the amount of conventional electricity the event uses, but we've dimmed the lights, so there's a little less being used for this one. Heading one of the world's largest innovation hubs is Jung-Woo, CEO of the Mars Discovery District. Jung is a self-described serial entrepreneur and investor. He has built breakthrough scale stage companies in mobile analytics and big data, media and entertainment, enterprise software, financial services, and pharma. He was recognized as one of Canada's top 40 under 40 leaders and is leading one of the 50 best managed private companies in this country. Jung was chair of Toronto-based NFQ Ventures, an early stage investment firm. He's active on a number of boards, including OMERS, the Toronto Region Board of Trade, Antibes Therapeutics, and Green Shield Canada. One bio I found online from another source says that Jung never effing quits, which is, I don't know, it sounds like it just about sums it up. Jung, I am pleased to turn the Canadian Club of Toronto podium over to you.
Thank you, Bruce. Thank you, Bruce, for that unusual and wonderful introduction. I love it, actually. Someone, I hope we recorded this, because I'd like to actually reuse this and replay this. Well, thank you to all of you for taking the time to actually come out on this snowy Friday afternoon to join us. I'd like to start by dedicating this speech to my mother, Susan Woo. We just lost her 2 weeks ago after the holiday break. She had a 10-year absolute fierce battle with Alzheimer's. My mother was a beautiful, proud, accomplished woman. She was the first woman to graduate from the National Taiwan University from a science and technology and engineering background, one of the very first few. And she gave everything to her family as we escaped a military autocracy to come to Canada. Now, her main aspiration for our family, if we were to ever achieve some level of fortune, was to give back to our adopted country. It's a country that welcomed us at a time when our family needed a new future. And she was excited that in Mars I had found my family away from family. It's a family with whom to pursue global impact for Canada and a country that we owe everything to. So when it comes to climate change, there is no bigger stage on which to create global impact through Canadian leadership and Canadian innovation. So let's talk climate change, shall we? And maybe I should just start by saying I'd rather not talk about climate change, because everybody only talks about climate change. Let's use our time today to pivot from talking climate change to taking climate action. One of the things that gets in the way of solutions that are on the table today is the people that deny that there's a problem. Because if you get outside the various bubbles that I know each of us live in, we all still hear things like, you know what, if climate change is real, how come there's still snow? It's kind of like saying, if world hunger is real, why am I eating a sandwich anyway? It's because weather is not climate. It's possible for it to be snowing in a mild winter day in Ontario, while record summer heat burns Australia to a crisp. Climate change is not the end of weather. It is the end of stability, and it's the end of predictability. And it's the rise of extreme weather events. You can see this, right? With your own eyes, every single day, all around the world. So I have to wonder, why are there still people that are denying that climate change is real? Aren't we past all this by now? With all of the data and the evidence that we have available to us, why is this even in the conversation? I mean, the evidence is irrefutable. Now, you may have heard a statistic that says 97% of all peer-reviewed scientific journals agree that climate change is genuine and anthropogenic. Anthropogenic as in man-made. Let's be clear. As of the last year, it was actually 100% of scientists. No daylight at all between the scientific community and this particular topic. The 20 warmest years on record happened in the past 22 years, and the toll has been heartbreaking. Global wildlife populations have dropped to 60% in just 40 years, and I can go on, but I'm not going to, because reasonable people already know all of this to be true. And conversely, unreasonable people can't be convinced that it is not false. So we're stuck. One side hoping desperately that the other side comes around before it's too late, which according to scientists is 10 years. That's the amount of time we have to work with. That's the amount of time before we're past the tipping point. And as I see it, there's been two reasons for this, despite all the evidence that we are still talking and not acting. First, it's been a long time, I think 1980s, my recollection, when the Club of Rome started talking about global warming. I think at the same time, Fran Drescher on The Nanny was talking about this in a few episodes too. Love that show. But the second thing is, in the past almost 40 years now, it seemed like an unsolvable problem, right? We've all read the articles. We've all know how bad it's going to be for us, for all life on this planet, if climate continues to accelerate and we continue to do nothing. That challenge does seem grim. It does seem insurmountable. And of course, the natural result is cynicism, apathy, a lack of action. Well, at this point, I could launch into, of course, a very serious and very earnest lecture about what we need to do to get this right. I can even paint a very grim picture of what happens if we don't. But you've all heard that message before. In fact, you've literally seen that movie before. An Inconvenient Truth came out 14 years ago when Greta Thunberg was 2 years old. Yet, we have yet to translate talk into action. I think I might know why. I'm not convinced that scaring people with dire warnings leads to meaningful action. I mean, I come from the world of business. I am an entrepreneur. And in that world, Darwin's laws of natural selection work perfectly. Few succeed, almost everybody fails. Yet people still start businesses, right? I mean, we have 1,500 entrepreneurs in North America's largest urban innovation hub outside, starting, growing, running, and scaling businesses. So entrepreneurs put in an enormous amount of time, and they put their lives on hold. They put their futures on the line. They know that they might fail even though they do this. So why is it that people can be hopeful when they start a business, but pessimistic when they come to saving the planet? It comes down to a basic human emotion. It's about hope. When people start a business despite all evidence to the contrary, and trust me, I've lived that journey. Most of my companies shouldn't have survived, but I'm happy they did. Despite all evidence to the contrary, they hope for the best. They can see in their mind's eye what success looks like. They can picture themselves beating the odds, and they can imagine the rewards that follow. But when it comes to the conversation around climate change, it's actually the opposite, the complete opposite. Despite all the evidence that we can make a difference, we fear the worst. We cannot picture beating the odds, nor can we visualize the rewards that follow. You know, we've moved from being climate deniers to something even worse in my perspective, more insidious, more corrosive. We're becoming climate fatalists, and that's not how it needs to be. I'd like to invite you to imagine a world of hope. Because it doesn't matter how many people on Twitter or Facebook deny this problem. In fact, it's not people, it's mostly bots. But it doesn't matter. Businesses and governments are moving inexorably to solve climate change because they know they have to. Now, the theme of this talk is imagine. So, to quote John Lennon, everything will be okay in the end. And if it's not okay, it's not the end. Climate action is becoming a broadly based, politically agnostic, and capital-attracting movement. Just look at what's happening around the world. Here in Canada, Scotiabank committed $100 billion by 2025 to help fight climate change. And in the US, Microsoft has pledged to be a carbon-neutral organization by 2030, in 10 years. We have someone from BlackRock in the room, Margaret. So Larry Fink, chief executive of BlackRock, used his annual letter to warn of significant asset repricing as a result of climate risk. These are private sector leaders with fiduciary duties to their shareholders and to their stakeholders. And they're realizing that there is nothing more profitable than purpose. So, for Margaret, thank you, Rocco. If there's anybody from Scotiabank or Microsoft or Margaret from BlackRock in the audience, please come see me after this speech. I think there is a lot of money to be made, and we can save a planet together at the same time. And, not or. Because I can go on and on and on with examples that have been ripped from the headlines of the business section in every paper around this world. And you know what? Actually, these headlines are giving me some hope. I see that hope up close and personal every day when I walk in and out of this campus with the people that work in Mars and the people that work with Mars. I'm utterly convinced, based on what I've seen, that we have what we need right now to change our world for the better. And I'm speaking as the CEO of Mars, not as an entrepreneur that has silly aspirations, even though I might fail. So what would happen if we deployed these ideas and technologies on a massive scale? Instead of the doom and the gloom, today I want to talk about hope. I'm going to sketch a picture of a world where we listen to the experts. They're out there, scientists, engineers, entrepreneurs, where we take action, where we get to work tackling climate change. I'm going to talk about what it would take to solve climate change and what our world could look like if we succeed. This is something that we at Mars have made our priority. It's joining with, and in many ways leading, the efforts that are happening in the startup and the investment community. At Mars, we believe that art inspires and that science can solve some of humanity's greatest problems. The short video clip behind me shows the overwhelming response we got from the #1 rated Nuit Blanche event, here, entitled Transformation. Over 25,000 visitors during the midnight hours showed at our climate action exhibit. And we are now launching our new program, what we call Missions from Mars, because we're Mars. Others call them moonshots, grand challenges. We call them Mission from Mars, which brings the full power of the Mars innovation ecosystem to inspire our community to make a massive impact on climate change. This is not overconfidence. It's not arrogance. We trust the numbers we are seeing. We trust the experts that are giving us these numbers. And they're telling us that we can make a material dent on global emissions by widely deploying on a global scale even just a handful of innovations that are developed right here in Canada. In fact, right here in Mars. So today I'm going to focus in on just 3 of those innovations. And taken together, the punchline is they actually have the potential to lead us into a prosperous post-carbon economy. They can bring some balance back to our world, not just by reversing the damage that has been caused, but actually building a better home for all of us and the creatures that we share our world with. In the process, employing people in good, well-paying jobs of the future and delivering value back to our investors. So the first company I want to tell you about is CarbonCure. Now, did you know the second most consumed substance on the planet is concrete? Next only to water? I mean, it's actually pretty obvious when you try and take a drive down Yonge Street and through Spadina. It's impossible, right? The construction going on is just staggering. But did you also know that concrete manufacturing is one of the worst emitters of carbon dioxide on the planet? So imagine a world where we can capture that carbon dioxide and freeze it into concrete. Imagine that doing so is not only cheaper, but it makes that concrete stronger and more durable. That's CarbonCure. CarbonCure's technology could reduce emissions by up to 70 megatons if it captured just 10% of the market. And if deployed to its full potential, it could slash those concrete-related emissions by 600 megatons. That, by the way, takes out almost all of Canada's annual emissions. One innovation, one solution, one company. Just one. And already, the Calgary Airport is deploying that product on their runway, effectively negating some of the emissions from aircraft. So the technology exists, that's what I want to say, and it works, and it can make a vast difference. The people in this room represent the captains of industry in Canada. So the question I have is, how can we work together to accelerate deployment of these kinds of technologies? Here's another company. I'm really, really excited about this. Cool company, Smarter Alloys. Imagine if you can program metal to take a particular shape. And imagine if that metal returns to its original shape when it heats up. We did this for the Canadian Club, by the way, so I thought it was really cool. In effect, we have a situation where releasing energy when exposed to energy can create energy. We don't think about this much, but about 70% of all of the energy produced by humanity actually gets released into the atmosphere. 70%. A majority of that heat is released at temperatures that today are considered too low to economically capture and use. So typically it's vented. Now what happens if we put that heat to work? And that's what Smarter Alloys does. They've built a new type of super efficient, superconductive heat engine that can capture low-grade waste heat to generate inexpensive and emission-free electricity. Paul just chaired our Energy Advisory Board committee when we saw Ibrahim Khan here, and it was shocking. Think about this. The world's coal, natural gas, and nuclear plants put together account for about 11.5 gigatons of carbon dioxide equivalent emissions annually. And actually, it's really coal and natural gas. Nuclear plants already are emission-free. But if we just took 15% of the product of those plants and used Smarter Alloys' heat engine to turn their low-grade waste heat into electricity, we would avoid nearly 1 gigaton of greenhouse gas emissions annually. This is a huge opportunity because the applications for this technology actually go way beyond power generation. They go to what happens if we could capture waste heat from transportation or buildings, refrigeration, data centers, even heat from the sun or the ocean or our own planet underground. Imagine the emissions that can be avoided. Now, these two companies are just a small sample of Canadian innovation. There's another 1,498 science and technology companies behind them, just in the Mars ecosystem alone. So these companies can have a huge impact on global GHG emissions over the next 10 years. In fact, if we deployed the technology from just these two companies across the entire globe, it could absolutely offset all of Canada's GHG emissions. Two companies that exist today, two companies that exist today with technology that already works. There's nothing speculative about this, folks. I'd like you to imagine one more thing. Imagine that we're already making progress towards a post-carbon world. It won't take much imagination because we already are. And I'd like to imagine that it's happening not just with the usual suspects. Now, what do folks think in this room when we talk about China and the environment? 1.4 billion people, a coal-fueled manufacturing economy, maybe smog-infested cities. Yeah, they have a long way to go. But they are also in the middle of a 5-year plan that will invest almost $500 billion into renewable energy technologies, including energy storage. More than half the focus in Beijing's current 5-year plan involves innovation, artificial intelligence, technology, resources, and yes, the environment. Now, why are they doing all this? There's the obvious reason. Of course, they need to address a livable environment for the most populated country in the world. But make no mistake, they also know that they can dominate in a global market of clean technologies that will be a $3.8 trillion industry in the next 10 years. Yes, I said trillion, that starts with a T. So we can wait for the next wave of innovation to come from China, and we could once again, the tired old movie for Canada, we could once again be stuck buying back made in China products that were discovered right here in Canada. And by the way, how's Huawei working out for us these days? Why aren't we talking about Nortel instead? 5G was Canada's to lose, and we lost it. How about instead, let's play a different movie? How about let's invest into the solutions that Canadian companies are developing? Because we're punching way above our weight right now. We have 12 of the top 100 clean tech innovators in the world, and the majority of those are actually in Mars, in the Mars ecosystem. By demographics and by population, Canada should have 1/2 of one company on that list of 100 top clean tech innovators. The company I just talked about, CarbonCure, was the top #1 company in North America on that list. Our mission at Mars is quite simple. It is to be the engine for Canada to lead the innovation economy. We can do that. We can do that by putting the full weight of our ecosystem behind our most promising innovators to solve for one of the biggest challenges facing humanity, climate change. Now, I'd actually like to tell you about one more solution that will help us fulfill that mission and tap into that $3.8 trillion market. That innovation is HydroStore. Now, you might have heard of HydroStore's compressed air storage project, right? It was tested just a few kilometers away, right off the Toronto Island, and it solves the biggest problem in renewable energy because, of course, wind blows only when it blows, right? And the sun only shines when the clouds aren't there. So it's not exactly tied to peak versus non-peak hours on the grid. A lot of that energy gets lost. What if that energy could get captured and stored? HydroStore uses that surplus clean energy to pump compressed air into underwater balloons at off-peak times. And then it releases that air when it's needed to power generators during peak times on the grid. Now, this could lay the groundwork for massive storage systems of 200 to 300 megawatts. Translated, that kind of system would actually power cities of 200,000 homes. Not pocket change. Now, skeptics will always say you can never reach that scale, right? Well, there's another innovation company I wanted to point out, NRStore. NRStore is proving the skeptics wrong. They're partnering with HydroStore to launch the world's first example of a commercial scale rollout. We're finally getting this right because you know where it's happening? It's happening in Goderich, repurposing flooded salt mines. This is a made in Canada, invented in Canada, led by Canada solution. Imagine if we could scale it up even further. Think about the cities and all the markets that we could reach. And actually, you don't have to imagine this. They're doing it. They're advancing a pipeline, I believe, a deal pipeline of over 2 gigawatts across 3 different continents right now. Massive impact, and it's Canadian. That's how Canada wins in the innovation economy. Companies like HydroStore, NRStore, Smarter Alloys, CarbonCure, they're showing us today what is possible. They're showing us a world that we can create, one that is greener, one that is cleaner. Don't forget, one that is more prosperous as well. Because these are not just companies that will do well. These are companies that are doing good. Now, I don't have the time today to take you through the other 1,497 companies in the Mars ecosystem, but I think you get my point. Our entrepreneurs will transform Canada's future in the global innovation economy, even as they transform global climate. The reminder, nothing is more profitable than purpose. And if you don't believe me, talk to Jeff Bezos, talk to Michael Bloomberg, talk to Reid Hoffman, Bill Gates, Richard Branson. They've all made big bets. In fact, they're all investors in CarbonCure. Some very, very smart people are placing some very, very big bets that these companies are going to do extremely well. And so are we here at Mars. We are working to accelerate the adoption of solutions that significantly reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and we're prioritizing our highest impact ventures and ecosystem partners to help them remove all internal and external barriers to scale. We're working with businesses and governments to develop carbon reduction strategies. We're driving policy change in Canada that incentivizes the adoption of carbon-reducing innovations. We're doing all that by putting all of our effort, all of our networks behind this. And we're using our voice and opportunities like this one over our luncheon to spread a message of hope. Hope that is rooted in something more than just sunny optimism or wishful thinking. Hope that is based on technologies that exist today, born out of the hard work of our fellow Canadians, the entrepreneurs, the innovators, our risk takers. And that is why my mother brought our family here, to be part of a culture of hope, to be part of a country of possibility. There's no doubt about it, climate change is scary, and we live at an inflection point in human history. But if we become too frightened to act, if we are too cynical to hope, if we're too blind to see the opportunities that are in front of us, those worst fears will be realized. Instead, if we can imagine a different outcome, a world where our energy is cheap and emission-free, a world where we save our rainforests and our wildlife, a world where we have a wealth of green jobs and opportunity, more livable cities. Let's imagine a world where we have clean water and air. That world is better than the one we have right now. It would be the product of our best ideas. It would be a product of our best innovators. If we embrace what is already underway, if we take that opportunity that we are building in a massive, massive way here in Canada, I have no doubt that we will defeat climate change. So I ask you to join me in imagining that. I invite you to join us in getting that right. Thank you.
Fantastic. That was great. Wow. So we've got some more questions. Just wave your cards around. Colleen's going to bring them up to me. Can I ask you anything?
Anything.
Oh, I love that.
Anything goes.
I've got permission. Okay. So the first question here, I want to ask you, why did you choose to share these particular companies? Now, I'm sure HydroStore, it was only because of the image of the giant whoopee cushion under Lake Ontario that would be so compelling about that particular one. Just kidding. Why these three?
Well, I mean, quite frankly, I could have chosen a lot, but we only had a limited time over lunch. But these three are really, really interesting, different ways of cutting and pasting the energy puzzle that we have. On the one hand, we have carbon sequestration, which is actually a drawdown technology on greenhouse gases. You know, take carbon, embed it into the product, actually reduce carbon through embedded. On the second hand, we have smarter alloys, which says, you know what happens if we can actually take energy and optimize it? Wasted energy, 70%, what happens if we can repurpose it so that we don't have to create as much dirty energy? And then, of course, storage. Without storage, renewable energy perishes. Like, without storage, we're left to the vagaries of when wind blows and when sun shines. And so these things, I think, put together really represent a methodology, a process for us to really drive a complete solution. And here's the last thing. They are all working at scale today. If we were able to find a way to increase the adoption from the captains of industry we have in this room to drive for global, not just regional penetration, we create a leadership position for Canada in the innovation economy built around these technologies. I mean, I'm Canadian because we chose to be here, not because we were lucky enough to be here. But when I think about Canada and the future, why don't we want a bigger slice of the $3.8 trillion category that's coming up?
I want to follow up on that theme because you're clearly very passionate about Canada.
A little bit, yes.
A little bit,
yeah.
A little bit, that was abundantly clear. But let's have a straight conversation about what our country's strengths are and what our weaknesses are in terms of capitalizing on this opportunity. I mean, there are clearly many, many strengths. I'd love your top one or two. Yeah. And then what are the top one or two challenges that we as a country face that have this not be an easy layup?
Okay. Top of my head, I would say we have always been a country of innovation. We have no trouble discovering new cures, new solutions, insulin was discovered right across the street and first applied over here. I think the governor of Indiana came over here and he was busy thanking all of the team over here for creating Eli Lilly in Indiana. Great, right? Stem cells was discovered across the street. I mean, we have innovations over innovations over innovations. I think the artificial heart was discovered here, even the zipper. The point is, we discover until we have, but we have not been able to really commercialize that scale. And I'm going to give you two analogies to that. The only thing that we do where we're not satisfied with playing to make the playoffs, but where we want to play to win, is hockey. Why don't we play hockey? Why don't we play at our business like we play hockey?
Right.
Right? So there's a bit of that. The second thing I'd say is that our innovators and our entrepreneurs and capital, talent, innovation, discoveries, patents, intellectual property, it's all borderless. It's all borderless. If we want the benefits to accrue to Canada, we have to build global companies that are based in Canada. How do we do that? Well, we have to increase the risk appetite in our own Canadian Main Street businesses. You know, we walk in and out of here every day and we think this is the world. Well, it's actually an echo chamber. It's not connected sufficiently to the Main Street businesses, which drive 98% of the economic activity in Canada. If we increase the risk appetite amongst our own Main Street businesses, it helps launch our innovators with proofs of concepts over here. Canada's a small country. We're not a global market, but we can sure be an awesome launch pad for our companies.
A lot of us were around for the dot-com boom and bust
right.
back in the late 90s, early 2000s. And this question is, how do you increase the likelihood that capital is well invested? Because with this tide change, it's like, wow, climate change, let's invest in it, it's amazing. But how do we ensure that we find the Amazons, the Amazon.com, and not just the Pets.com?
Gotcha. You know, we're living at a great time for entrepreneurs. That would be my argument. That we have, I think, an 11-year bull run on our side right now as far as the availability for capital. It's never easy to be an entrepreneur. It's never easy to raise capital, but you have to make you have to make hay when the sun is shining, right? That's the terminology. So it's a great time to be an entrepreneur. Cycles come and cycles go, though. So we have to make sure that we back this 15-year journey. This didn't happen overnight. This didn't happen over the last 2 years. We crawled over broken glass in order to get to walk, in order to get to run. Maybe we're into a sprint right now. We have to back our momentum. If we do so the next 3 to 5 years of building companies with true penetration and true adoption with customers and partners, that's going to survive whatever cycle comes. Now, I have this big problem with sort of the notion of trying to drive for creating of unicorns. You know, private companies valued at over $1 billion that basically ratchet up their valuation based on another private round that takes them I mean, when you have to build real companies, you actually have to build things that matter to real customers, to real markets, and to real partners, and to real financial advisors.
I'm going to sneak in two last questions.
Yes.
So just your quick answer on both. The last one will be what's next. But before
Okay.
I ask you what's next, this one is, do you believe that the notion of making very small changes to your lifestyle, such as changing your light bulbs, is detrimental by making the solutions to this problem seem easy? It's an interesting one, as we're going to all stop recycling, and I don't know. It's an interesting question. Is it detrimental?
Absolutely not.
No.
Absolutely not. It's a necessary but insufficient condition is the way I think about it. And the most important part of the necessary is that it's the mindset. It's not someone else's problem. It's each of our problems that we share. We share the same air. We share the same water. We share the same, sources of food. If we're not all sort of mindful about what happens personally, then why should anybody care on a business level? We have to connect those two things. So it's a necessary but insufficient condition is what I'm going to say.
I'm sneaking in an extra one. What's the next initiative in the missions from Mars?
So we're so excited about this. In the world that we live in today, there is no such thing as a single entity, business, entrepreneur that can solve for everything themselves. We live in a world where things are interconnected. And a mission from Mars is our way of saying, where can we get a small, tight coalition of the willing? The entrepreneurs, the private sector partners, the public sector partners, the regulators and the policymakers, like a small, tight coalition that can actually solve and change and transform a market like this. From that, we create a movement. But the first step is we're launching this exercise in order to say, how do we harness all of these different stakeholders with a single unifying purpose? Reducing and actually eliminating Canada's greenhouse gas emissions. And by the way, we're not going to stop at Canada. We think that this is a global opportunity, and we do share the same air, the same water, and the same food. So let's go for this.
All right, the final question, I love this because it's kind of the call to action. As an audience member who isn't an investor or a business leader, what can I do?
I think it's back to your first question, actually. It's to be mindful, it's to communicate, it's to talk it up. This is a movement that should not just be about businesses, this is a movement that should be about people. And I can already see it today. When I walk in Mars, I mean, we have young people, brilliant young people, that hold us to account. It's no longer sufficient to say, what, just trust me. Well, we got this, Doesn't happen like that. Xiaofei or Holanda are going to come and say, well, why? Like, what are you doing that satisfies my need to have an impact, my need to be associated with an organization that's driving an impact? We should be held to account. When we're held to account, we hold our supply chains, our partners, our stakeholders and backers to account. Larry Fink is doing what he's doing because he knows that there are two things. Correct me if I'm wrong, Margaret, but there's an opportunity to drive massive impact, which matters to his stakeholders and matters to his employees and matters to his investors. He also understands that there is an untapped opportunity to drive returns. And I think this is a situation we're finding in today where it's no longer impact versus return. We have George Cook in the room. Where's George? George is the chair of OMERS. And George was on one of my panels. And he coined this term, impact drives return, before it was actually cool to say that. So I give all the credit to George. But the point is, we're no longer in a situation whether it's an either or. I'm going to drive impact or I'm going to drive return. In fact, these two things can be combined into a massive and. And Canada has that opportunity and has that obligation to drive the and, because we are too small as a country to kind of think we can do it all on our own.
Thank you. Thank you. Jung-Woo.
All right.
Wow. Fantastic. That was inspiring, that was energizing, that was clear. I feel like we have the roadmap, and we have both a physical and ideological and conceptual place to have this conversation. So thank you for joining us, and thank you to Mars for hosting us and being a catalyst for this. It's really a fantastic event. I want to close by just talking about two other events that we've got coming up. One is next week. It is February 11th. We are hosting New Leaders and New Perspectives on Canadian Arts and Culture. And what makes it so great is there's so many amazing arts leaders in this country. 3 run major institutions, and they have all been in their jobs for less than 2 years, at TIFF, at the National Gallery, and at Soulpepper. They will all be together talking about new perspectives. On the 24th of February, we're gathering a panel of export specialists to discuss the challenges and solutions to get Canadian goods out into the world, which is really consistent with everything Jung-Woo said about Canadians taking a leadership role. Another round of thanks to Borden Ladner Gervais, BLG, for sponsoring today's event. And of course, thank you to Mars for welcoming us to their space. I also want to thank MediaEvents.ca, Canada's online event space, and VVC for live streaming today's event. Thank you so much for giving us some of your time today, and enjoy the rest of your afternoon.